I remember that day so clearly. I was walking down the street on my usual route to the cafe where I worked. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. It was one of those days where everything felt ordinary, nothing too exciting, nothing too wrong. But then, I saw him. A man in a well-tailored suit, clearly wealthy, standing in front of a small street cart. The vendor, an older woman with graying hair and a tired smile, was trying to sell her handmade jewelry. She was struggling to get his attention, but when she did, he just scoffed at her, rolling his eyes. "Who's gonna buy this junk?" He laughed, shaking his head, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "You really think anyone's interested in this crap?" The woman's face faltered, just for a second. She must have heard words like that before, but it didn't stop the hurt from showing. She stood still, staring at him, but didn't respond. I felt a rush of anger. I was a waitress at the cafe, and I had seen all sorts of people. But this man? He was something else. His attitude stunk of entitlement, and I could see how he looked down on the vendor, not even considering the fact that she was just trying to make a living. The man turned to leave, still chuckling to himself. I looked at the vendor, who just gave a small, sad smile. She looked down at her hands like she was used to people ignoring her, like she was used to being invisible. I wanted to say something, but I didn't. I didn't know what to say. So I just kept walking, my heart heavy with the unfairness of it all. But I had no idea that what happened next would change everything. The next day, I walked down the same street again, heading to the cafe for my shift. I was lost in thought, still bothered by what I had seen the day before. As I passed by the street vendor's cart, I noticed something different. There were more people gathered around. The cart was bustling, and the woman was smiling brightly, chatting with customers. I stopped for a moment, curious. That's when I saw him. The man from yesterday. He was standing there in front of the cart, looking completely out of place. His fancy suit, the expensive watch on his wrist, all of it stood out against the simple, humble surroundings of the vendor's cart. But what caught my attention wasn't his clothes, it was his expression. His face was tight, as if he was trying to hide embarrassment, but it wasn't working. I took a few steps closer, trying to understand what was happening. Was he just passing by again? Or had he come back to apologize? But no, it wasn't an apology. It was something worse. He was holding a small, delicate bracelet in his hand, the one he had mocked the day before. He was showing it to a woman who seemed impressed, but he looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know what to say. The vendor was standing behind him, silently, watching the whole scene unfold. I stood there, watching, my heart racing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The man from yesterday, the one who had laughed at the woman's jewelry, was now trying to buy it. Was he doing this to save face, or was he genuinely interested in the bracelet now? I took another step forward, and just as I did, I overheard the vendor's voice, quiet but firm. "I think it's too late for you, sir. You laughed at my work yesterday, and now you want to buy it?" Her voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it, an edge of pride that I hadn't noticed before. The man's face turned red, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. He had been so cruel the day before, and now he was the one standing there, looking lost and foolish. The vendor turned away, focusing on the next customer who had arrived. And that was when the man did something I never expected. He stood there, staring at her for a moment, before quietly setting the bracelet down on the table. Then, without another word, he left. I was left standing there, wondering what had just happened. The next day, when I walked by the cart again, I didn't see the vendor at first. It wasn't until I got closer that I noticed a small crowd gathered around, and the woman was talking to someone. She seemed much busier than usual. But what caught my attention immediately was the man, the one who had mocked her jewelry just days before. He was sitting at a small table near the cart, his head down, looking like he hadn't slept. He was holding a phone in his hand, and I could see the frustration and regret in his posture. He looked completely different from the arrogant man I had seen before. The suit was still expensive, but his usual confident, almost smug expression was gone. I hesitated, but then something made me walk closer, trying not to make my presence too obvious. I wanted to know what was happening, what had changed. Was he here to try and make amends? But no, that wasn't it. He was on the phone, his voice low but urgent. "I don't care how much it costs, just get the deal done." He sounded desperate now, like a man trying to salvage what little he had left. I couldn't hear the rest of the conversation, but it was clear he was in trouble. His company was in trouble, his voice shaking as he spoke to whoever was on the other line, and yet, no one was giving him any sympathy. The vendor, who had been standing next to him moments ago, simply walked past him, not even looking his way. It was as if he didn't exist anymore. I couldn't stop myself from speaking up. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, trying to make him aware of my presence. He looked up at me for the first time in days. His eyes were tired, his face drawn and pale. There was no trace of the arrogance that had once been there. I messed up," he muttered, staring at the table. "I shouldn't have laughed at her. I shouldn't have said those things." The words he said were barely audible, but they carried weight. He was talking to me, but it felt like he was talking to himself too. I hesitated before speaking. "What happened? You seemed so sure of yourself before." He sighed deeply, the weight of his mistakes clearly weighing heavily on him. "I lost everything. My company, my investors. I don't know how it happened so fast, but it did. Now I'm trying to fix it, but it feels like everything's falling apart. And I insulted her like I had the right to." I felt a surge of sympathy for him, even though he had been cruel to the vendor. I guess we all have our moments when we think we're untouchable, when we think we can get away with anything. But that doesn't always last. "I'm sorry," he added, looking at me with regret. "I didn't mean it. The jewelry, it's beautiful. I didn't see it before. I should have bought it. I should have done something different." I looked back at the vendor's cart. She wasn't there anymore. The crowd had dispersed, and I realized it was the end of her day. I turned back to the man. "You know, you still have time to make things right. Maybe not with your company, but with her. She deserves that, at least." He nodded slowly, standing up. "I will," he said, determination in his voice. "I'll fix it. I don't care what it takes. I'm going to apologize." And just like that, he walked away, heading in the direction of the vendor's usual spot. I couldn't help but wonder, would it be enough? Would an apology be enough to undo the hurt he had caused? Or was it too late for that? I didn't know, but I was curious to see how his story would unfold. But little did I know, that wasn't the last time I would see him. A week had passed since I'd last seen him, and life had continued its usual pace. I was working my shift at the cafe when I saw him again. Only this time, he wasn't alone. He was with the street vendor, the one he had mocked, and they were talking like old friends, both laughing and chatting casually. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago, he had been so arrogant, dismissing her work as worthless. I couldn't help but watch them from the counter. My curiosity piqued. Had he really turned things around? Was he serious about making amends? They were sitting at one of the tables outside the cafe, sharing coffee. It seemed so surreal. The street vendor, whose name I had learned was Maria, looked more at ease now, no longer the woman with the tired smile I had first seen. She was smiling, truly smiling, and it was clear that something had changed for both of them. I couldn't resist anymore. I walked outside slowly as if drawn by some invisible force. As I approached them, I could hear snippets of their conversation. "I didn't think anyone would believe in me," Maria said, her voice gentle, her hands gesturing toward the jewelry laid out before them. But you actually saw value in it." The man smiled, but it wasn't the arrogant grin from before. It was a warm smile, the kind that only came with genuine understanding. "I've learned a lot these past few days. I thought I had everything figured out, but I was wrong. I've seen how much work you put into this. I can't believe I was so blind." Maria shook her head, her laughter light. "Well, we all make mistakes. The important thing is that you realize it and do something about it. You're not the first person who's made me feel small, and you won't be the last. But I've learned that no one can take my worth away from me." There was something so powerful in her words. She had a strength I hadn't noticed before, a quiet strength that was far more valuable than any piece of jewelry. I walked up to their table, hesitating just for a moment before speaking. "Hey," I said, a little awkwardly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say, I'm glad you two are getting along now." The man looked up at me, and there was no trace of shame or embarrassment in his eyes. Instead, there was a sense of relief, like he was grateful for the chance to make things right. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "I didn't deserve your sympathy before, but you gave it to me anyway. It meant a lot, and it means even more now." Maria nodded, giving me a warm smile. Sometimes, it just takes a little time for people to realize what really matters. I could see it now. What mattered was not the things they had once believed in, the wealth, the status, or the power. What mattered was the connection they had forged, the understanding that had grown between them. They had both come a long way, and somehow, that made me believe in the possibility of change. Before I left them, the man turned to Maria and added, "I've decided to invest in your jewelry. I think people need to see what you're creating. Your work deserves more than just a corner cart." Maria's eyes widened in surprise. "You're serious?" "I am," he said with a nod. "I'll help you get it to more people. You deserve it." As I walked away, I couldn't help but smile to myself. Maybe, just maybe, people could change. Maybe they could learn, grow, and become better versions of themselves. The road wasn't easy, and it never would be. But this was a start, a new beginning for both of them, in ways I never expected. The weeks that followed were nothing short of surprising. The street vendor, Maria, started gaining more attention. With the man's investment, her handmade jewelry began to appear in small local boutiques and even in a few upscale shops around the city. She was no longer just a street vendor. Her craft was being appreciated, and that made her heart swell with pride. As for the man, whose name I had learned was Daniel, he seemed to have completely turned his life around. He had sold off some of his properties and had thrown himself into supporting Maria's business. People in the city started seeing him differently. He wasn't just some rich businessman anymore. He was someone who had taken responsibility for his past mistakes and was working hard to make things right. I saw them together often, sitting at the cafe or talking in the park, planning their next steps. Maria was teaching him about the intricacies of her craft, showing him how each piece of jewelry was made with care and attention. It was strange. There was something beautiful in seeing their bond grow. It wasn't just about business. It was about respect, understanding, and the realization that everyone has their own struggles, their own story. I remember one evening, I was finishing my shift at the cafe when I saw them sitting by the window, deep in conversation. Maria looked more confident than I had ever seen her, and Daniel seemed genuinely happy, not the way he had looked when I first met him, lost and desperate. I walked over to their table, feeling a little shy. I was happy for them, but I was also wondering how far they had come. It was impossible to ignore the changes in both of them, the transformation that had happened over just a few months. "Hi," I greeted them, giving a smile. "I was just wondering, how's everything going?" Maria looked up, her eyes sparkling. "Better than I could have ever imagined. Thanks to this one," she said, pointing to Daniel. "My jewelry's now in several shops around the city, and we're even talking about opening a little store of our own." Daniel grinned, looking at her with genuine admiration. "I couldn't have done it without Maria. She's the one who taught me that there's more to life than money and success. I was so blind before." I could see how much Daniel had changed, and it warmed my heart. But there was something else, something I hadn't expected. A quiet, unspoken connection between the two of them. It wasn't just about business anymore. They had grown to trust and respect each other. "That's amazing," I said, my voice a little soft. "I'm really happy for you both. It's not every day you see something like this." Maria smiled, and I could see the gratitude in her eyes. "It's a journey. We all make mistakes, but it's what we do afterward that counts. You were right, you said I deserved better, and I'm starting to believe it." I smiled at her words, feeling the truth of them deep in my chest. Yes, we all make mistakes, but we also have the chance to make things right. And sometimes, the most unexpected people can change. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this story touched you and brought some inspiration your way. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and share with others who might love it too. And if you want to see more stories just like this, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. Your support means the world to me and helps me create even more content for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below. Until next time.